Hey fellow developers, this is Manish and welcome to Frontend Interview Pro. Here in this video, we will learn to use the 4 brand new hooks: useTransition, useActionState, useFormStatus, and useOptimistic, which were recently introduced in React 19. Also, timestamps for each of these hooks explanation will be in the description, so feel free to skip to your desired part. So now without any delay, let's get started. We will be learning about these new hooks by using an example. As you can see, this is a very simple login form. So now going to the code of this form, we have a Vite application that has React 19 installed. So whenever you're trying to use these new hooks, make sure you have React 19 installed. Okay, so let's go to the app component and quickly go through the code. So here, as you can see, we have 3 states: form data, which is storing the email and password values, an error state, and is pending state. And then we have the handle submit function. So here, as you can see, the first statement is set is pending true. So whenever we call this function, we are setting is pending as true, which reflects in this login button. So whenever is pending will be true, the button will have a loading spinner, and then we make the API call, and if there is any error, we are setting the set error state to true. So if you see below here, we are using this error state. So if error is true, we are showing a message failed to login. And then after all this is run, finally we are setting the set is pending state to false. Now let's go to the browser and visualize all these different behaviors. So I'm gonna type an email ID. Let's type any password, and then when I click on the login button, it should show a circular progress, which it is showing. And also we have this beautiful toaster whenever the API call succeeds. So all this is happening because, as I already mentioned, whenever is pending state is true, we will have the circular progress on the login button, and whenever this API call succeeds, we will have a toaster which says login successful. So everything is working as expected, and now let's see what our first hook useTransition does. If you do not know, useTransition was first introduced in React 18 itself. But in React 19, what the team did is introduce support for async functions inside of a transition. So what do I mean by it? For that, let's import the useTransition hook. And this hook, when called, returns 2 things: is pending and a start transition function. So by using this hook, we can basically eliminate the use of this is pending state that we added manually. So let's remove it. Now what we can do is basically call this handle submit function inside of a transition. So let's just do that. So I will just cut this function body and call our start transition function and paste the function body inside of it. So what this means is basically we're passing this async function as an argument to the start transition function. So this function body will run as a transition, and this behavior of passing asynchronous functions is introduced in React 19 only. Back then, like in React 18, we were not able to use asynchronous functions inside of a transition. It's only possible with React 19. So now we can just remove this set is pending state because it is now handled internally by the useTransition hook itself. So we also need to remove this as well. So now let's go to our website and run the same test case that we just did a few minutes back. So I will write some random password, and when I click on login, it should show this circular progress, which it is definitely showing, which means that we are correctly getting the is pending state from the useTransition hook. Basically, it made our life a bit easier by eliminating the use of an extra is pending state. Now let's see what the next hook useActionState does. For your information, this is a brand new hook that got introduced in React 19. Let's import it as well. useActionState. Let's call this useActionState hook, and now what it returns us is 3 things: error, submit action, and is pending. So if you see, useTransition hook returns us 2 things: Now this useActionState hook is returning us 3 things. So let's comment this useTransition hook. And now if you also see, we can technically remove this error state as well. Quite similar to the isPending state that we just removed when we used the useTransition hook. Now what we can do is, instead of calling this function as a transition, we can pass this function as an argument into the useActionState hook, like this. So let's remove this. The benefit of doing this is that the useActionState hook injects or gives us 2 parameters, previous state and form data. Just to keep things clear, this form data is not same as this form data. So let's just rename it to avoid confusion. Now let's go to our website and see whether it's working correctly or not. Type a random password, and when I click on login, you can see it's working as expected. So basically what I can see is useActionState eliminates the use of an extra error and isPending state. And also what it gives us is these 2 props, which we did not cover earlier. So what it does, so if you see, now when we're calling this API, we are using the form data state. Nowhere we are using this form data parameter. So let's just first see what this form data is. So form data is basically form data. So what we can do is form data.get email and form data.get password. So let's just log these 2 values and see what we get. Let's go back to our website, open the console, and if I click on login, you can see that we are getting our email and password. Let's just change this email a bit. Click on login, and you can see we are getting the updated value again. So form data basically gives us the data of the input field without even using this state. So using this, we can basically create uncontrolled forms. So if you do not believe me, what we can do is we can basically remove this value, this on change, this value, this on change, save it. Let's say refresh the page, and now if I type and click on login, you can see we are getting the value of our form directly from form data itself. So this is not coming from this state. So this is the benefit of using this useActionState hook. We also have another parameter to cover, which is previous state. So before we go into knowing more about the previous state, we can do a very small change. So instead of using the form data state, we can use this form data parameter. So let's just remove it, and I will create an object. Here email will be form data.get email and password will be form data.get password. So this will give us the same data that we got using the form data state. Now coming to the previous state, what this actually is, suppose we are returning some value from this async function. So in our case, we're returning null or true, but let's say, or let's assume we're returning something and we're calling this submit action or this specific action for the first time. So we're calling this for the first time and we're returning some value, and then for some reasons we are again calling it for the second time. So the return value of the previous call will be this previous state value for the current call. It's quite self-explanatory, right? Previous state. So we will of course look into an example, but just before that, let's say we're calling this action for the first time. In that case, previous state will of course be undefined, right? But for some reasons, we want to have a default state, a default previous state. So in that case, what we can do is this useActionState hook accepts 2 parameters. So here the first parameter is of course an action, and the second parameter is the default previous state. So here if you want, we can pass any value that becomes the default previous state. So if we do not have any previous state, it will take the value from this parameter. So in our case, we won't be needing any previous state. So I will not write anything. We can just keep it as null. Now let's look at an example of how we can use this previous state. For that, first let's return some value from our action. So instead of returning null, let's return this data itself. Now let's just check if my previous email is same as my current email. And if it is, let's show an error message that says you have inputted the same email. Please enter a new one. And then we have to return the same form state that we have here. So basically we have to return this same object. So let's copy it, put it in a variable called as body, and let's use it here and here as well. Save it. And now if we go to our website, type in email 123@gmail.com, some password, click on update, and you can see we have the login failed message, but it's showing the wrong icon. And the reason for login failed is this. Okay, I got it. So basically we have two bugs. So the first one is we're showing the wrong icon for the wrong message. So the reason for that is we're using success instead of error, because this is the catch block. So this is technically an error message. And then this cannot read properties of null is because when we're calling this action for the first time, previous state is null, right? Because we have used null. So here we can do an optional chaining. So this will basically prevent this error from happening. And now if we check 123@gmail.com, some password, update, we have login successful. For now, you can ignore this failed to login message. Let's type the same email again, click on update, and you can see it is showing us the error message. You have inputted the same email, please enter a new one. So you can see that we have used this previous state to prevent form updates again, depending on a certain condition. What I just showed you is a very basic example of how we can use previous state, but you can use it in a totally different manner, which is fine too. Now coming to why we are getting this fail to login message even though we have a success. So if you see, here we are showing this fail to login message whenever we have some error value. So if this is not falsy, we are showing this fail to login message. And this is coming from this error variable, which is getting returned from useActionState. So here I did a very small mistake, which is that this is actually not error. This is basically the state which we are returning from our action. So instead of error, we can name it as state, and let's just log it and see what this state actually is. So here this will be null or undefined. So let's just keep it as false to prevent any errors. Save it. Now if I go back to our project, let's just refresh the page, type an email, some random password, and click on update. Now if we see, the state value is the same as what we're returning from our action, which is really great. Now if we want to show an error, then we have to return some state that distinguishes between the actual data and error. So here what we can do is, let's return an object that says error is true and message will be failed to login. So now whenever we have an error, this state value will have error property and message property. Now we can use these same exact properties here. So instead of false, what we can do is, if state dot error is true, then show state dot message. To test this, let's throw an error from this if block. So whenever we input the same email twice, this will throw an error which will be caught by this catch block, and from here we're showing an error toaster and also returning the error state. So now let's go to the website, refresh the page, type an email, some password. Mind it, this is our first attempt, so when we click on update it should not show any error. But now on a second attempt, if we're typing or inputting the same email, some password, and now if we click on update, you can see that we are getting this fail to login message and also this login fail toaster, which indicates that our error block is working as expected. With this, we have covered two hooks, useTransition and useActionState. Now it's time to look into the useFormStatus hook. This hook is the simplest of all and kind of not that useful. Regardless, to use this, let's wrap our button component inside of another component. So I'm going to create a component by the name of button wrapper, and let's just put a curly braces and do return. Here what we have to do is let's import the useFormStatus hook. So this hook is not available in React. This comes from the React DOM. And now what this returns is a pending state, which basically gives us the status of the form. So now instead of using is pending here in the loading prop, we can use the pending state directly. So now if we use the button wrapper component instead of button, so let's do that. Save. Now let's go to the website. Now if you see, type an email, some random password and click on update, it's working the same way as it was before. The only difference is that now we are not using the is pending state that we're getting from useActionState hook. We are using the pending state that we're getting from the useFormStatus hook. But now the main thing is, how is this button wrapper component getting access to the pending state of the form? So in React 19, what they did is that the form element kind of works like a context. So every component which is inside of this form element will have access to the form status. So since button wrapper is inside of the form element, we are getting the status of the form, and hence we can use it like this. I highly recommend you use useActionState instead of useTransition or useFormStatus. Now let's cover our last and final hook, which is useOptimistic. For useOptimistic, first let's modify our example a bit. So here I'm going to create a state which is current email, and then set current email, and then use state, and I will give the value as 123@gmail.com. So now if we scroll down, instead of login into your account, what we can do is update email, and then here let's give the default value as current email. We also do not need this password field, so let's comment it out. And now let's go to our website, and you can see that this is our default email which is coming from this current email state, which is great. Now let's import the useOptimistic hook, which can be found in React. What it accepts is a value which we want to change optimistically. So in our case, this will be the current email, and what this hook returns is two things. First is optimistic email, and then a function using which we can update our value optimistically. So I'm going to name it as setOptimisticEmail. And if things are unclear, just hold on to me. In few minutes, everything will be crystal clear. And now let's use this optimistic email state to show what our current email is. So your current email is optimistic email. Now let's go to our website, and as you can see, this is our current default email. So now what useOptimistic hook does is it allows us to update values optimistically. So what do I mean by that? let's assume this is some kind of an application where I have logged in as a user. And this is my current email 123@gmail.com. As a user, I want to change my email to let's say 1234@gmail.com. Now, let's say the developers of this application or this product has made this update email feature optimistic on the front end. So now what would happen is, as soon as I click on update, it will show the updated email here instantly, even before the API call succeeds. And after the API call succeeds, it will take whatever response that we get from the API and populate it over here. But since both the emails are already same, which is 1234@gmail.com, users won't notice that. And let's say for some reasons the API updation failed. In that case, the old email, which is 123@gmail.com, will automatically come here, or basically it will revert back to the old email. So this optimistic behavior is a design choice which developers have to take, and using this useOptimistic hook, this behavior can be implemented very easily. So let's see how we can do that. Going to the code, and in the useActionState hook, what we have to do is, just before the API call happens, we somehow have to update our optimistic value state to the new user inputted value. So here, just after this body statement, what we can do is set optimistic email and then body.email. Here body.email is the new user inputted value, and we can also remove these console logs, this error statement, and also we do not need the password field, so let's remove that also. And now after the API call succeeds, we have to update our current email state to the new email also. So let's do that. Set current email data.email. Let's change the success message as well. It will be email updated successfully. Hit the save button, and now let's go to our website. Hit the refresh button. So this is our current email. Let's change it to 1234@gmail.com. Click on update, and you can see the new email just appears here instantly. If you missed it, let's try it once more. Now let's do 12345 and then update. Again, you can see the new email just appears instantly. So you can see this is a great user experience. Overall, it feels very snappy. Now, what happens if for some reasons the update API fails? So let's try that case as well. So here what we can do is, in the mock API function, we can just comment the success part and let's just reject it. Okay, we will not process the success part. And also let's change this error messages. What we can do is email updation failed. Let's make it same. Now refresh the page, and if we now try to update our email, click on update, you can see that it shows the new email, and then when the API fails, it reverts to our old original email automatically. So let's try that once more. Update. You can see it just updates to the new email, and when it fails, it comes back to the previous old email. So this is overall the optimistic behavior in applications. So as you can see, this is the optimistic behavior in applications that we can now implement very easily using the new useOptimistic hook. With this, we have covered 4 hooks that were recently introduced or upgraded in React 19. And we have reached the end of this video. So if you have learned something new, please make sure to subscribe my channel and also like and share this video. Yeah, let's see you on the next one. Until then, stay safe and keep coding.